Hey everybody, it's Mr. Hoin again, and we have another online lecture today, as well as a worksheet that you'll be answering questions to based on my lecture and based on a series of YouTube videos that I'm going to ask you to watch and respond to. So before we go any further, I want to make sure that you've opened up either the Microsoft Word version or the Google Doc version of today's this week's assignment, which is the questions on class, social class. There are 19 questions that you'll need to answer. I have split this lesson into 2 YouTube videos, so it's not too lengthy in one. So this first part is going to cover the first 10 questions, and here we go. All right, so before we go any further, I want to make sure that everyone understands the fundamental definition of social class and classism. Social class, is a division of society based primarily on your economic status. In other words, how much money you earn, how much money you're worth, determines your social class. Classism is the systematic assignment of worth based on economic class. All right, so that's the fundamental understanding that everyone needs to understand before we go much further. The United States has maintained a social class system for pretty much the nation's birth, going back to 1776. Now, this was never formalized in any document. There is no document that says we're going to use a social class system based on capitalism. It's just something that has happened, and we've maintained it for the better part of 243 years. We're going to get into what capitalism is, but I really want to make sure everyone understands that since our nation's birth, the United States has maintained a class-based system. It looks, of course, very different today in the year 2020, but most economists, these are people who study the economic system of not just the United States, but other nations' economies, as well as historians over the last 50 years, have classified and divided America into 5 basic classes. We have the upper class, the upper middle class, the lower middle class, and the lower class. And we need to understand who these people are, all right, and where you fit into this class-based system. So the first thing I'm going to ask you to do is to pause the video when I tell you to and answer question number 1. What you're going to be determining is sort of guessing the number, the percent of the population who fit into each of these economic classes. All right, and as you can see here, I have given an economic range, a numerical range, to determine who fits into what fifth of the social class system that we have in the United States. Now, I want to, before I go much further, make sure you understand that these numbers are not sort of determined by the government. They're not determined by any set organization. What I did, based on my homework, is sort of go through all of the statistical data I could find on social class and then sort of average together sort of a general economic range that each of these 5 groups fit into. And these are the numbers that I came up with. The upper class, your household income would be making over $188,000 a year to be considered the upper class. And again, household income range means that it's the combined income for any particular household. So if you have a working mom and a working dad, you combine their income to come up with an income range, all right? If you're a single income earner, then you fit into, you're still gonna fit into one of these 5 classes, all right? But if you're multiple family participants who are contributing to the household income, you're combining that together. The upper middle class, you'd be making $126,000 to $188,000 a year. Middle class, sometimes also known as the working class, is earning between $55,000 to $126,000 a year. You have the lower middle class, which is making $31,000 to $55,000 a year as a household income. And then the lowest class, the poverty class, is earning $31,000 a year or less. The $31,000 or less, it's important to note, is roughly minimum wage. If you were to be working a minimum wage job over the course of 1 year, you're earning $31,000 or less. All right, so what I need you to do right now is to pause the tape, pause this video, and try to guess on your own what is the percentage of America that fits into each of these 5 classes. Of course, if you were to total up these 5, it would come up to 100%. So please pause the video and do question number 1 right now, and then come back. All right, so here are the actual numbers based on 2016 census data that I collected to determine what is the percentage of America that fits into each of these 5 classes. At the very, very top, the upper class, 9% of America earns over $188,000 for household income. The upper middle class, a little less than that, about 8% of America makes up the upper middle class, earning between $126,000 to $188,000. The middle class, as you can see here, makes up the majority of America's, majority of America, earning between $55,000 to $126,000 a year. Right underneath that, the lower middle class, which is the second largest economic group in America, is earning $31,000 to $55,000 a year. And then our poverty class, the lower class, is earning $31,000 or less. That makes up about 15% of America is living in poverty. All right? So what I need you to do right now is to pause the video once again and answer question number 2, which is asking you to compare your guess numbers that you did for question number 1 with the actual numbers that you see on the screen here. So pause the video and answer question number 2. All right, we're back. And what I wanted to do right now is to sort of drill down a little bit more deeply for you to understand who each of these 5 economic classes are in America. Let's begin at the very, very top, the upper class, also known as the owning class. They own real estate, they own homes, they own cars, they own investment portfolios. They are making over $188,000 a year. The percent of the population is 9%. Who are these people? They're corporate executives. They're professional athletes and entertainers like LeBron James. They are investment bankers. We have the 2 wealthiest men in America here, Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, are also part of this sort of owning class. They are large-scale entrepreneurs like the Jeff Bezos or the Elon Musks of the world who run huge businesses. They are highly educated with typically a college degree or beyond. They are predominantly white. They are politically influential and well-connected with each other and within government. The upper middle class, this is a group that once again is earning between $126,000 to $188,000. They represent about 8% of the population. These are white-collar professionals. You sometimes might hear of blue-collar versus white-collar. White-collar refers to sort of people that have a desk job. They're not necessarily working with their hands. They are sort of highly educated individuals, much like lawyers, physicians, physician assistants, accountants, engineers. They typically have a college degree or beyond. They are predominantly white, but you also see a growing population of minority people within this group. They are considered trendsetters and public opinion shapers. All right, so that's the upper middle class. The working class, the middle class, the biggest population within the United States, representing about 45% of the population. Who are these people? These are middle managers. They're teachers like myself, nurses, contractors, electricians, plumbers, carpenters, salespeople, IT professionals, and small business owners. This makes up the largest percentage of the American population. They are mostly college educated. It is a very racially mixed group. And they also have very strong union connections, this group, the working class. Like myself, as a teacher, I belong to a teachers union. If you're an electrician, you need to belong to an electricians union. So again, this working class is predominantly union driven. The lower class, the lower middle class, I should say, also referred to sometimes as the blue collar class, is earning $31,000 to $55,000 a year for household income. They represent 23% of America. Who are these people? They're hourly blue collar workers working in the food industries, the service industries. They can be lower level contractors, truck drivers, machinists, manufacturers working on a factory floor are typically within that economic range. They clearly have at least a high school education and some college. It is a very racially mixed group. Once again, we see a large percentage of union workers in here. And also you see a large percentage of healthcare workers and senior care workers are within this class. And then we have the lowest class, the working poor, the unemployed, the poverty stricken. With a household income of $31,000 or less, they represent about 15% of America. These are hourly workers, typically minimum wage workers. They are working in the retail industry, the food industry. They could be contractors, they work in daycare, or they're simply unemployed. They have a minimum high school education or less. They could be high school dropouts. They are predominantly minority, and they also have limited health care. All right? So this is where I'm going to ask you to pause the video once again to answer questions 3, 4, and 5. These are open-ended questions. I'm asking you to provide as clear and embellished answer as possible for each of the 3 questions that are on the screen here, which are also on your worksheet. So please pause the video right now, and when you're done answering question number 5, come back and we'll address question number 6. All right, we're back. And question number 6 is going to ask you to watch a short video that was done by the Brookings Institution, which is a well-known Washington, D.C. based group that looks into sort of the politics and economic and social systems of America. And this is a fascinating video done by a guy named Richard Reeves, who is an economist. And I want you to watch this video, and the link for that video is on your worksheet that you are provided there. I want you to watch the video and then answer question number 6 after having watched the video. So pause the video right now, watch this video on YouTube, and answer the 2 questions that I've asked you for question number 6. All right? Please pause the video now. All right, I found that video to be really, really interesting, and I have actually provided you over the course of this unit a series of videos that I think are really interesting and provide a level of detail that I simply can't, nor expertise that I can't, and we'll be getting to those videos in a second. All right, so we need to understand the larger history of class systems, and fundamentally, you need to understand that every civilization, going back to the very, very beginning, the Mesopotamians and the Egyptians of thousands of years before Christ, all used some class-based system. It's really, really simple, actually. Wealth, since the beginning of the invention of money, has always equated to power. All right? Wealth equals power. The more wealth you have, the more socio-political power you have. Less wealth, less power. That is basically the formula of human history leading all the way up till the present. That's the way it was, that's the way it is, that's probably the way it will always be, and that's fundamentally what everyone needs to understand, all right? The next thing I'm going to ask you to do is once again pause the video and watch another fascinating video. This one is by Dr. Nicole Mason. and she recorded a video with a group called The Big Think. If you've never seen any of these videos on YouTube, I encourage you to visit their channel and watch an assortment of just fascinating perspectives on life, on things like politics and economics and sociology. This particular video is focusing on how very often in a culture like America, if you are born poor, you're most likely to stay poor throughout the course of your life. We'd like to believe in the American dream where we can always sort of move up, but that hasn't really been the case over the course of the last many decades, and you need to understand why that is. I think this video sheds some light on that. So what I'm going to ask you to do right now is to once again pause the video, access the link that is provided in the Microsoft Word document or the Google Doc version that you are answering these questions, watch the video, and then answer the 2 questions that I've asked for questions number 7. Please pause the video now and come back after you're done. All right, so I want to get into this American dream thing a little bit more, which was referenced in the video with Dr. Nicole Mason, the last video that you saw. And I want you to, once again, when I'm done talking here and when I direct you, to pause the video and ask and answer questions relating to question 8. What it involves is this so-called American dream. And I've provided you a definition, and I've also given you that definition on the worksheet. The definition of the American dream, which I think is pretty solid and generally agreed on, is this. The American dream is the belief that anyone, regardless of where they are born or what class they are born into, can attain their own version of success in a society where upward mobility is possible for everyone. Upward mobility means the ability to move up your social class. If you're born poor, you have the ability and opportunity to rise higher in the social scale. It is achieved through sacrifice, risk-taking, and hard work rather than by chance. All right, so what I want you to do now is to pause the video and answer the 2 questions that I've given you for question number 8. When you're done, come back, and we need to then understand this capitalist system that we're living under. So pause the video now and answer question 8. All right, so before we go much further, we need to understand what capitalism is. This is the economic and political system that the United States has used since its birth in 1776. And it's critical for you to understand capitalism. You're going to hear this word come up repeatedly over the course of your education, and it's something that you're going to live under for the rest of your life. Your parents, your grandparents, and everyone before them lived under capitalism, and your kids and their kids and their kids and their kids will live under the capitalist system unless we have a revolution and get rid of it. But it's important that you understand what capitalism is. So please, please pay attention and understand. All right, so capitalism. Here's a fundamental definition of capitalism. Capitalism is an economic and political system in which a country's trade, business, and industry are controlled by private owners for profit rather than by the government or the state. All right? So it's a political and economic system that works together to encourage private ownership, and private ownership is going to create businesses, both small and big, for the purpose of profit gain. All right? That's capitalism. Capitalism's ideology is based on a couple fundamental ideas that everyone needs to understand. First of all, competition is what capitalism is about. I'm going to create a product and I'm going to try to sell that product, and I'm going to have to compete in a market that may be selling similar products, so I need to sort of come up with a way to be more successful than my competitors, using price, using quality, using all of the things that drives competition within an economic system. That is fundamentally what capitalism is about, competition. Some people are going to have more than others based more on abilities and desire. And this is very controversial. Then once again, this sort of gets into the American dream concept. And some of you may have different opinions about this, and I want to hear that throughout the course of this particular unit. Capitalism is inevitably going to result in an unequal distribution of wealth, which is what we see in the 5 economic classes that we have in America. You're going to have a very rich and you're going to have a very poor. That is the fundamental result of capitalism, all right? Capitalism also is based on the belief that the less government intervention into business is better. So keep government out of business. Don't over-regulate government. Don't have government regulate business, because it's only going to end up badly, all right? The opposing forces of capitalism, the opposing ideologies of communism, are socialism and communism. And we also need to understand what those two concepts are, because if you're going to understand what capitalism is, you also need to understand the opposing ideologies, all right? And I have a slide here which does that for you. Socialism and communism are the opposing systems to capitalism historically. What's important to understand is that communism is a more extreme version of socialism, all right? So let's first understand what socialism is, because I'm not going to really drill down too deeply what communism is. You'll understand communism when you get into U.S. history and world history. But let's get into socialism. Socialism's basic ideas are based on that the people or the state, the government, owns and controls the means of production. Whereas in capitalism, it's individuals that drive profit and drive wealth. Socialism has the government controlling major industries, like the auto industry, like farming, like the transportation industry. What you see in socialist countries is the government owns and operates major industries, not the little bodegas on the corner of cities like Bridgeport, but major industries are controlled by the government. And then what you have is the government receiving revenue from those major industries and then distributing that income back out to their population, where you don't have extreme social class stratification. You don't have a super rich and a super poor. You have a more level playing field for the entire population, all right? You also, within socialism, have either no or limited private property. It's the government that owns property, not individuals, all right? That's also very important. Socialism also is considered sort of a welfare state, where you have nationalized healthcare, where you have government subsistence to sort of help people who are struggling. We have elements, we have socialist elements here in the United States, but probably not so much as other nations like Scandinavian countries, like Sweden and Norway are much more socialist. France is much more socialist than the United States. And then you have communist nations, which are even more extreme versions of socialist systems, where you have countries like China, Cuba. This map here I find fascinating, that sort of breaks out where socialism and communism exist. The deeper the red color, the more communist those countries are, and the pinker the colors they are more socialist systems. And then white, you can assume, are more based on capitalism, all right? So we're gonna end our video here, and then I'm gonna ask you to come back and watch the part 2, is based on these 2 political cartoons. And what I'm gonna ask you to do for questions 9 and 10 is to take a good look at these 2 political cartoons, which are both featured on your worksheet. And what I'm gonna ask you to do is analyze these political cartoons very closely, and then answer a series of questions, the same questions for both cartoons. Both of these cartoons were done in the early 1900s. Both of them clearly express their point of view about capitalism. One is definitely promoting capitalism and one is promoting socialism. And you need to sort of dig into the various aspects and elements of these pictures to determine what. And then you're going to answer the questions, what is the intended message? And I need you to justify your answer with specific elements from the illustration to support your answer. So what I'm going to ask you to do is we're going to stop the tape here. When you're done with questions 9 and 10, I'm going to ask you to open up the link for part 2 of this lesson on social class. I'll see you in part 2.